I woke up from the cold. The old heater had gone out again in the middle of the night, and the room was freezing. My 75-year-old joints ached every time the temperature dropped below 10 degrees. Climbing out of bed, I pulled on two sweaters, one on top of the other. It's been my morning routine ever since I've been here in this godforsaken wilderness, in a house that looks more like a barn than human habitation. Hubert Chambers is my name, or rather, it was until I died 2 years ago. I look out the small window with cracked glass, taped crosswise with Scotch tape. Outside the window is a dense forest and a washed-out dirt road leading nowhere. The nearest settlement is 20 kilometers away. I'm not sure I could walk there, especially in winter. I inherited the house from my son Vernon and his lovely wife Imogene. They decided that the old electrician had lived long enough and, most importantly, had made enough money. Sighing heavily, I walk over to the heater and begin to inspect it. My fingers, knotted from arthritis, still remember how to handle electronics. I spent 47 years working as an electrician and startup equipment adjuster in factories and power plants. My hands identify the problem. Oxidized contacts. All I had to do was clean and tighten the connections. 10 minutes later, the heater started humming, gradually filling the room with warmth. A small victory in a series of defeats. I limped into the kitchen, if you could call it a corner, with a shabby table and an ancient electric stove. I need to make tea or my brain won't work, and I need a clear head to remember and plan. Looking at the murky water boiling in the tin mug, there is no kettle here. I replay the events of 2 years ago. Back then, I was in the hospital with a heart attack. Not my first, but the most serious. 3 days in the ICU, another week in the ward. Vernon came in every day, sat next to me with a concerned look. Imogene brought home-cooked meals, so caring. I returned home to my penthouse on the top floor of the River Bay apartment complex in Malden, a 2-bedroom apartment with panoramic windows and river views. Not a palace, but it was the most valuable thing I had. I bought it 5 years before I retired, investing all my savings and taking out a mortgage, which I then paid off for 7 more years. I wanted to grow old in comfort. A week after I was discharged, Vernon offered to take me on a nature vacation. He and Imogene had gotten a country house, he said. The fresh air would help me recover. I agreed. Why refuse when my son showed concern? Our relationship had already been strained since his mother, my Elizabeth, died 15 years ago. I've raised him alone since he was 12, worked 3 jobs to give him an education. But he was always dissatisfied, always wanted more. Vernon took the long route, explaining that the main road was closed. We drove for almost 4 hours. I dozed off and only woke up when the car stopped in front of a gray wooden house on the edge of the woods. "Here we are, Father. Your resort awaits." Vernon grinned as he unloaded my suitcase. The house was abandoned. I realized that at once, but I kept silent. I figured my son was playing a joke or some kind of surprise. Inside, it smelled damp and dusty. 1 bedroom, a living room with a kitchen, and a tiny bathroom with rusty fixtures. Vernon hurriedly showed me around the house, told me the refrigerator was stocked with groceries. Really, it was only stocked for a couple days, and then scurried off. "Are you staying the night?" I asked, starting to realize what was going on. "No, Dad, I have business in town. I'll be back in a couple days to check on you." He didn't look me in the eye. "Is there a phone here?" "The connection is bad," he said, standing in the doorway. "Rest, get your strength back." He left, and I stayed. And the longer I stayed in this dacha, the clearer I realized that I was not brought here to rest. After 3 days, I ran out of food. After a week, I realized Vernon wasn't coming back. I began to explore the house and found old newspapers, magazines, and a box of tools in the attic. Among the newspapers, I found a fresh issue of the Malden Times dated 2 weeks earlier. On the 3rd page was my picture and a small obituary. Hubert Chambers, 73 years of age, passed away after a lingering illness. The farewell ceremony will be held at the Greenwood Funeral Home. I reread those lines over and over again, unable to believe my eyes. I was buried, officially buried. I imagined Vernon and Imogene standing at the closed casket with fake sorrow on their faces, accepting my condolences. I later learned that they had forged the medical records, using Imogene's connections at the insurance company where she worked. According to the paperwork, I died of complications from a heart attack. Something broke inside of me that day. I spent 48 hours in a daze sitting by the window looking out at the woods, and then I took action. The first order of business was to provide myself with the minimum comfort to survive. I surveyed the house and realized that it could be made livable using my knowledge as an electrician. The wiring was old but working. I found and eliminated several dangerous connections that could lead to a fire. I fixed light switches, replaced burned-out light bulbs I found in the pantry. The plumbing was more difficult. The pipes had frozen and burst in several places. I made temporary repairs with duct tape and sealant, but it was only a temporary solution. The heating was powered by electricity through ancient space heaters. I disassembled and cleaned each one, replacing burnout elements with parts taken off non-working appliances I found in the shed behind the house. By the end of the first month, I had turned an uninhabitable structure into a relatively comfortable shelter. But the problem of food remained acute. I picked mushrooms and berries in the forest, but it was not enough. One day I decided to take a risk and walk to the nearest village. The journey took almost the whole day. My appearance surprised the locals. They rarely saw new faces. I introduced myself as Thomas and said I had recently bought a house in the forest. No one asked too many questions. With the last money I had with me on the day of the move, I bought groceries and a kerosene lamp in case of a power outage. In the township, I learned that I was 120 kilometers from Molden in another county. No wonder Vernon had chosen such a remote place. No one would look for me there. Returning home with a heavy backpack of groceries, I pondered my situation. My son had declared me dead in order to take possession of my property, my penthouse, my savings, my life. And I must live out my life in the middle of nowhere, abandoned, forgotten, buried alive. Every night I sat at the window, looking out at the road that led into the woods. Sometimes I imagined Vernon's car driving down it. He had come to his senses, repented, come to apologize and take me home. But those were just the old man's fantasies. Reality was far more cruel. With the onset of fall, it got colder. The electricity was often cut off by storms, and I spent long nights by the light of a kerosene lamp wrapped in blankets. It was on such nights that I began to think of a plan for revenge, not just to go home and get justice. No, I wanted Vernon and Imogene to feel what I had felt all these months. Helplessness, loneliness, betrayal. I began keeping a journal, writing down every detail I could remember of my past life. Addresses, names, account numbers, anything that might be useful. I made lists of people who could help me when I got back to Molden, because I was determined to go back. My son had made a mistake. He hadn't killed me, only sent me into exile. And now I had a purpose that gave me the strength to wake up every morning and fight the cold, hunger, and despair. I would sit at the window for hours watching the wildlife and think about how Vernon had inherited my stubbornness and practicality, but had not inherited the most important thing, a conscience. It pained me to realize that my own child had been capable of such betrayal. Elizabeth would roll over in her grave if she knew she'd raised a son like that. But there were bright moments in this forced hermitage. I discovered that the woods around the house were full of life. A family of foxes had set up a burrow not far from my porch. Every morning I watched the fox cubs play in the clearing while their mother hunted. Gradually they got used to me and stopped running away when I left the house. One night there was a violent thunderstorm. Lightning struck a tree near the house and it collapsed, blocking the only road. I spent 2 days cutting the trunk with an old handsaw I found in the barn. My hands were bleeding from blisters and my back refused to straighten, but I didn't give up. This incident showed me that I was still capable of many things despite my age. In those days, I often thought back to my work as an electrician, how I adjusted starting equipment in factories, how I eliminated accidents in substations, how I worked under extreme conditions. These memories gave me strength. If I was able to survive after an electric shock of 480 volts, I can survive in betrayal of my son. Months passed. I adapted to life in the woods. I learned to preserve mushrooms and berries, catch fish in the stream flowing a kilometer from the house. I built a simple system for collecting rainwater. But with each passing day, my determination to return and restore justice grew in me. I didn't want to die in oblivion, letting my son steal my life with impunity. On the day that was exactly 2 years since my funeral, I made a decision. No more surviving, No more passively waiting. It was time to act. I took out my diary, reread the entries of the last months. The plan formed neatly and clearly. I needed to get to Malden, find my old friends, gather evidence of Vernon and Imogene's fraud, and then strike when they least expected it. I spent a week preparing, fixed an old radio so I could catch the news, packed a backpack, prepared the house for a long absence, turned off the electricity, shut off the water. The last night before I left, I sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. The sky here, away from the city lights, was studded with myriad stars. I thought about the fact that I had a long way to go. I might not make it. Maybe my heart wouldn't be able to take it, but it was worth a try. In the morning, I took one last walk around the house that had become my refuge in prison for 2 years. I locked the door and put the key under the stone by the porch. Something told me that I would come back here again, not as a prisoner, but as a jailer. I walked down the dirt road toward the village. The first step on the road to retribution had been taken. I, Hubert Chambers, an officially dead but very much alive old man, was returning to the world for the sole purpose of showing my son that some dead men do not lie quietly in their graves. Malden greeted me with a hustle and bustle that I had grown accustomed to during my 2 years in the forest wilderness. It took me a long time to get there, first by foot to the village, then by hitchhiking to town, and finally by bus to Malden. My meager supply of cash was almost depleted, but it didn't matter. I had a plan. The first thing I did was find a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I paid 3 days' rent in advance and checked in under the name Thomas Winslow. I didn't have my ID, it was all left in the penthouse. But the desk clerk, an older woman with tired eyes, didn't ask questions when she saw the cash. The room was small and shabby, but it seemed almost luxurious after the cabin in the woods. Hot water, electricity that didn't go off every 2 hours, a paradise for an old man who'd lived in exile for 2 years. I showered, changed into clean clothes, bought secondhand on the way out, and sat by the window, watching the city that had once been my home. Now I was a stranger here, a dead person, a ghost. The next morning I set out on a reconnaissance mission. I needed to find out what had happened to my possessions, how my son and daughter-in-law were doing, which of my old friends were still in town. But I had to be careful. If anyone recognized me before the time was up, the plan would fail. I put on a cap, sunglasses, and a scarf, despite the warm weather. During my 2 years of hermitry, I had grown a beard that was now gray and unkempt, which served as an additional disguise. The first item on my plan was to find out the fate of my penthouse in the River Bay apartment complex. I settled down on a park bench across the street from the building and watched. By noon, I saw Imogene coming out of the main entrance. She had changed. Better groomed, expensive clothes, new haircut. My sister-in-law got into a shiny black SUV, also new, so they're still there, in my house, spending my money. The next step was to find old friends who could help. I headed to the neighborhood where Oliver Payne, my electrical work colleague and closest friend for 30 years, lived. As I approached his house, I felt my heart pounding. What if he was gone? What if he believed I was dead and had already mourned me? What if he sided with Vernon? The doorbell rang, a long wait. Finally, the door opened, and I saw Oliver, grayer and hunched over than I remembered, but still a sturdy old man with a keen eye. "What can I do for you?" he asked, not recognizing me. I took off my glasses and cap. "It's me, Ollie. Hubert." His face changed, going through a whole range of emotions. Disbelief, shock, joy, and finally confusion. "Hube, but you're dead. I went to your funeral. Would you invite an old friend in?" It's a long story, and it's better to tell it on the doorstep. Oliver let me in, still stunned by my appearance. We sat in the kitchen, and I told him everything. How Vernon and Imogen had declared me dead, the house in the woods, the 2 years I'd spent in exile, my return, and my plans for justice. "Damn bastard," was all Oliver said when I was done. "I always knew your son was a piece of work, but I didn't even expect this from him. I need your help, Ollie. Anything, old sport. You know that. And that's how I found my first ally in my mission." Oliver offered me a place to stay instead of a motel, and I gratefully accepted. Saving every dollar was important, as my funds were limited. Over the next few days, Oliver helped me gather information on Vernon and Imogene. Through his connections, Oliver was always outgoing and had friends all over town. We learned that my son had quit his accounting job right after my death. He was now posing as an investor and businessman, when in fact he was just squandering my money. Imogene quit her job at the insurance company and was now a society lady, hosting receptions and fundraisers in my penthouse. They traveled, bought expensive things, lived the high life, all on my life savings. They turned your funeral into a real show, Oliver said. A closed casket, lots of flowers, and Vernon gave a speech that brought tears to the eyes of half the people there. Talked about what a wonderful father you were, how much you'd done for him. Hypocritical bastard. Those words echoed in my heart. I remembered raising Vernon alone after Elizabeth died. She was only 39 when the cancer took her. Vernon had just turned 12, a difficult time for both of us. I worked my ass off to make sure my son had everything he needed. Picked up extra shifts, went out on emergency calls at night, worked weekends. Often risked my life on dangerous sites where the pay was better. I remember once almost dying at a substation during a storm. The electric shock threw me several meters away, and I lost consciousness. I woke up in hospital with second-degree burns and a concussion. But a week later, I was back at work, having to pay for Vernon's college. And he was always unhappy. His classmates drove their own cars and he didn't have one. His friends spent their vacations at resorts and we could only afford weekend trips to the lake. His girlfriends wanted expensive gifts and he couldn't buy them. "You never know what I want," he yelled in my face when he was 16. "You're always at work, always busy. You don't care about me." How wrong he was. Everything I did was for him. Every dollar I made, every overtime shift, every risk I took. "Hey, Hube, where the hell are you?" Oliver's voice brought me back to reality. "Sorry, I was just thinking." "What were you saying?" "I was saying Vernon and Imogene are having a big party this Friday. It's their wedding anniversary. There's gonna be tons of people, including Imogene's former co-workers from the insurance company. The same ones who helped fake your death. That was important information. The party could be the perfect time to resurrect me. But first I needed to gather more evidence and support. The next day, Oliver and I went to see Dwight Frank, the lawyer who had once helped me with the paperwork for the penthouse. Dwight was as shocked to see me as Oliver was, but he quickly pulled himself together. "This is a serious crime, Mr. Chambers," he said after hearing my story. "Forgery of a death certificate, fraud, maybe even kidnapping, given the circumstances of your move to that house. Your son could get real jail time." "I don't want to send him to jail," I replied. "I just want to get my property back and make him feel the way I felt." Dwight shook his head. "It's not that simple. Legally, you're dead. We'll have to prove that the death certificate is forged, which will require an investigation. It'll involve the police, the courts, maybe even the FBI if insurance fraud comes up. What if I just show up and claim I'm alive? Your son could claim you're an imposter. It would require DNA testing, witnesses to prove your identity. The process could take months. That was a problem. I didn't have months. My meager savings were dwindling by the day." "There is another way," Oliver said after we left Dwight's office. "More creative." He suggested a plan. Use fear and guilt against Vernon and Imogene. Make them believe they're haunted by a ghost, that I've come back from the grave to take revenge. And then, when they were on the verge of a nervous breakdown, to appear in the flesh and demand restitution. It was risky and not exactly legal, but I liked it. After all, it was illegal for them to declare me dead too. We started small. Oliver, who had contacts among Vernon's former colleagues, spread rumors that someone very much like me had been spotted in town. I myself, carefully disguised, passed by Imogene's acquaintances a few times, letting them catch a glimpse of me enough to doubt, but not enough to be sure. A week later, the town was buzzing. Word had reached Vernon and Imogene about the ghost of Hubert Chambers roaming the streets of Malden. Seeking retribution, we continued to gather information. It turned out that Vernon had invested some of his money in his friend's dubious business, a chain of car washes that was actually a front for money laundering. Another lead, another leverage point. Imogene, as it turned out, was having an affair with her tennis coach. Vernon didn't know it, but the whole country club was talking about it. Another trump card in our favor. Oliver and I contacted Jason Pratt, another electrician I'd worked with for years. Jason was happy to know I was alive and immediately offered his help. He owned a small electrical company, and he put a van with the company logo on it at our disposal. The perfect cover for surveillance of the penthouse. Now there were three of us, a small army to fight injustice. Sherman. I always thought Vernon was a spoiled brat, Jason said as we sat in his van, parked in front of River Bay. I remember when you turned down a promotion because the new position required a move and you didn't want to change your son's school, or how you worked over Christmas to buy him that stupid computer. I remembered. I remembered every sacrifice, every compromise you made for your son. I remembered his face when he unpacked that computer. Joyful, grateful. What happened to that boy? At what point had he turned into a man capable of declaring his own father dead for money? Look, Oliver pointed to the entrance of the building. There they are. Vernon and Imogene were getting out of the cab, laden with bags from expensive stores. My son had changed. My son had gotten fatter and fatter, with expensive watches and suits. Imogene was walking beside him in high heels, a new designer bag in her hands. They were laughing, carefree, happy laughter, as I watched them from the dark van like a ghost from the past. They had a party last weekend, Jason said. My daughter works for the catering company that catered the event. She said they spent a fortune. Champagne flowed, caviar, lobsters, 50 guests. My fortune. Money I've been saving all my life. Saving for everything, even medicine. They're planning a trip to Europe, Oliver added. A 3-week tour of Italy and France. First class, best hotels. They're sailing in a month, so we had a deadline. We had to act before they left. Over the next 2 weeks, we did extensive reconnaissance and preparation. I studied the layout of the compound, the security system, Vernon and Imogene's daily routine. Jason, using his connections in the electrical field, gained access to the building's video surveillance system. Oliver continued to spread rumors and gather information through his network of acquaintances. We learned that Vernon's fear of dogs was the result of a childhood attack by a neighbor's Rottweiler. That Imogene is panicky about spiders to the point that she once ran out of the house without clothes when she saw a tarantula at a friend's house while vacationing in Arizona. That they are both superstitious, though they try to hide it. Every day I remembered new details from my life with my son. How I taught him to ride his bike in the park near our old house. How I took him to baseball games even though I didn't like the sport myself. How proud I was of his first success in high school, of him going to college, of his first real job. Somewhere along the way I lost him. Or maybe I never really knew him. Oliver noticed my gloomy mood and tried to lift my spirits. Don't beat yourself up, Hube. You were a good father. Better than most. Some kids just come out bad, no matter how hard they try. Maybe he was right. Or maybe I was missing something important, some key part of raising my son. It didn't matter now. All that mattered was that Vernon and Imogene had to answer for their actions. The plan was ready. On Friday, their anniversary, when the penthouse would be full of guests, I would appear as a ghost from the past. But first we had to prepare the ground. We started with anonymous letters sent to the home address. I know what you did to Hubert, the first one said. The second contained only a picture of the house in the woods where I'd spent 2 years. The third was a quote from Vernon's funeral eulogy, signed Liar. Then came the strange calls in the middle of the night. Silence in the receiver or a quiet, barely audible, Vernon, son, in my voice, recorded on a voice recorder. Jason, using his wiring equipment, had arranged for the lights in their apartment to flash in a specific sequence to form Morse code, which neither Vernon nor Imogene knew, but the very fact frightened them. Oliver, through his acquaintances, spread more rumors about Hubert's ghost being seen outside the River Bay building in places I used to go, near the cemetery where I was supposedly buried. The plan was working. According to our informant, a concierge at River Bay who was an old buddy of Oliver's, Vernon and Imogene were on the verge of a nervous breakdown. They hired a private investigator, beefed up security, even consulted a psychic to calm the spirit of Hubert Chambers. Everything was ready for the final act. The wedding anniversary party was to be the climax of our plan, a place where the dead would rise to demand justice. On the eve of the big day, we gathered at Oliver's apartment to go over the details of the plan one more time. Are you sure you're ready for this, Hub? Oliver asked. Everything is going to change tomorrow. Your life, Vernon's life, everything will be different. I looked at the picture I always carried with me, Elizabeth, and little Vernon on a picnic in the park. All smiles, a happy family. It was a year before Elizabeth was diagnosed with cancer. Ready, I replied. Time for justice to be served. The day of retribution began with rain. I woke up to the sound of droplets drumming on Oliver's apartment window, and I thought the weather matched my mood, dreary but cleansing. Today was the day everything was going to be decided. The plan we'd been preparing for weeks was finally entering its final stages. The day Hubert Chambers would rise from the dead. How did you sleep, Ghost? Oliver grinned, handing me a cup of coffee. Today's your big day. Thank you. I accepted the cup with trembling hands. I was as nervous as a boy before a first date. We started our preparations early. Jason arrived at 8 in the morning with equipment and a set of tools. Now, Jason laid out the wiring diagram for the River Bay apartment complex on the table. This is the main switchboard. From here, we can control the lighting in the common areas and, more importantly, temporarily disable the video surveillance system on the floor we need. His knowledge was invaluable. Although I was an electrician myself, the systems had changed a lot in the last 2 years. Jason worked with the latest equipment, and without him, I wouldn't have been able to overcome the building's state-of-the-art defenses. We went over every detail of the plan one more time. Son and daughter-in-law will be receiving guests from 7 o'clock in the evening. According to the concierge, about 35 people were expected. Co-workers, friends, a few of Imogene's relatives. Among the guests would be those who had helped them forge the documents for my death. At 6:30, Jason would turn off the cameras on the right floors for 8 minutes, enough time for me to enter the building through the service entrance and take the staff elevator. Oliver will be waiting outside in the car, ready for a quick retreat if anything goes wrong. Do you remember what to do after you go in? Jason asked, handing me a small receiver and earpiece. Yes, I touched the device. Follow your instructions and stay calm. Exactly, Jason patted my shoulder. We'll be in touch the whole time. I spent the rest of the evening in a strange state of calm. It was like a thunderstorm. The air was filled with electricity, but it was still quiet. I shaved for the first time in months, cut my hair. The mirror reflected the same Hubert Chambers, older, with new wrinkles but recognizable. The man Vernon and Imogene thought was dead. 2 hours before the operation, I walked through some familiar Malden neighborhoods. I stopped at the Morningstar Cafe, where I used to eat breakfast every Sunday. The young waitress didn't recognize me, but the older barista Frank flinched when our gazes met. I put my finger to my lips and smiled slightly. His eyes widened, but he nodded. Our little secret. Then I stopped by the bookstore where I bought Detectives, the barber shop where I'd gotten my hair cut for years, the hardware store where I bought tools. Everywhere it was the same. Fleeting recognition. Disbelief. Whispers behind me. That's Hubert Chambers. It can't be. He died 2 years ago. I swear it's him. I knew him well. Could it be a ghost? Or does he have a twin brother? Rumors spread through Malden with the speed of wildfire. I envisioned them reaching Vernon and Imogene just before their party started. Panic, confusion, fear. Just what we needed. At 6 p.m., we gathered at Jason's van 2 blocks from River Bay. I was dressed in the navy blue suit I'd once worn to Vernon and Imogene's wedding. Oliver had found it at a thrift store. Apparently my stuff had been sold off after my death. Ready, Ghost? Oliver held out his hand to me. Ready. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you both. I couldn't have done it without you. Don't thank me, Jason said. I just want to see your son's face when his daddy comes back from the dead. We laughed, breaking the tension. Then we set up the equipment and moved toward the operation site. It was a warm evening, but I was still shivering. Not from the cold, but from anticipation. For 2 years I had waited for this moment. 2 long winters in a cold house, thinking about my son's betrayal, imagining this day. We pulled up to the service entrance at 6:25 sharp. Jason stayed in the van with his laptop, which was displaying the images from the surveillance cameras. Oliver got behind the wheel of the truck, ready to back out. The cameras will be off in 5 minutes, Jason said into my earpiece. They'll be off for exactly 8 minutes. That's enough time to get up to the 27th floor. I nodded and got out of the car. trying to look like a normal worker finishing a shift. A couple of employees coming out of the building didn't notice me, just another older man in work clothes. Cameras are off. Let's go, Jason commanded. I entered the building through the service entrance, using the key card Jason had cloned with his equipment. The staff lobby was empty. Most of the employees had already gone home. The staff elevator was old and slow. As it went up, I remembered the day I first saw this penthouse. Bright, spacious, overlooking the river. This is where I'll meet my old age, I thought then. And so, I go back there like a ghost. Approaching the floor, Jason warned. Be ready. The cameras will be on in 2 minutes. The elevator stopped. I stepped out into the service corridor that led to the residential part of the building. The door separating it from the residential floor was closed but unlocked. Another detail Jason had taken care of through his contact in maintenance. I slipped into the hallway and moved quickly toward the penthouse. There was music and voices coming from the door. The party was in full swing. The cameras are back on, Jason said. You're in the blind spot, but be careful. I walked to the door of my former home and froze for a moment. A strange feeling swept over me, a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination. Behind that door was a man who had betrayed me worse than any enemy could, and his wife, who was helping him. Instead of calling, I used the key I always carried with me, even in my forest exile. A little secret Vernon didn't know. I had a spare key hidden in the lining of an old coat. They hadn't bothered to change the locks after my death. The key turned with a quiet click. I opened the door and stepped into the noisy space filled with guests. The penthouse had changed. New furniture, paintings on the walls that weren't there before. My house had been turned into a trendy abode for a young couple, erasing all traces of its former owner. No one noticed me at first. The music was playing loudly. The guests were engrossed in talking, laughing, drinking. I moved slowly through the crowd, looking at faces. Some I recognized. Vernon's co-workers, family friends, a few neighbors. And then I saw him. Vernon was standing at the bar, laughing at something Imogen was telling him. He was wearing an expensive suit that must have cost a month's pension. She was resplendent in an open-back dress with a diamond necklace around her neck. My necklace, I'd bought it for Elizabeth for our 10th anniversary. I headed straight toward them, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. I thought, I don't want to die of a heart attack right now in the middle of the play. But I was determined to finish what I started. The guests began to notice me. Conversations died down as I walked by. Someone gasped. Someone whispered my name. A wave of surprise and shock swept through the room, finally reaching my son and his wife. Vernon turned, still laughing at some joke, and froze with a glass of champagne in his hand. His face turned white, his eyes widened, his mouth opened in mute amazement. Imogen followed his gaze, saw me, and shrieked, dropping her glass. The clink of broken glass cut through the sudden silence. "Hello, son," I said loudly and clearly. "Didn't expect to see your old man, did you?" Vernon staggered back, grabbing the bar. "It can't be," he whispered. "You're dead." "Oh, I was supposed to be dead, wasn't I?" I took another step forward. "You went to great lengths to make everyone believe that. A fake death certificate, a fake funeral, a touching eulogy." "Very impressive, Vernon." The guests began to murmur. Some stepped aside, others took out their phones, filming what was going on. The party atmosphere evaporated in an instant, giving way to a tense anticipation of scandal. "Dad!" Vernon's voice trembled. "But how did I survive in that barn you exiled me to?" I looked around the room. "It's a long story. I think your guests will be interested to hear how you and your wife declared me dead, forged documents, arranged a fake funeral, all for this penthouse and my savings." Imogen was the first to come to her senses. "There must be some mistake," she tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Hubert died 2 years ago. We were all at the funeral. That man is my father," Vernon interrupted her, finally realizing the situation. "But how, Dad?" "We thought that I died in that cabin?" I grinned bitterly. "I'm sorry to disappoint you. Turns out your old man is tougher than you thought." The murmurs among the guests grew louder. I noticed how some of them, especially those who had known me before, were scrutinizing my face, recognizing me. "It's really him," an older man said, stepping out of the crowd. It was Max Dower, my neighbor from the old apartment. Hubert Chambers. But at the funeral, some woman started. There was a closed casket, I finished for her. Very convenient, wasn't it? No one saw the body. No one could confirm that I was really dead. Vernon took a step toward me, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and confusion. Dad, listen to me. You don't understand. We thought it was best for everyone. You were sick, you needed peace, quiet. In a crumbling shack with no basic amenities, I raised my voice. You left me for dead, Vernon. You declared me dead so you could take my possessions. My own flesh and blood betrayed me worse than any enemy could. It's not true, Vernon was almost shouting. We cared for you. That house, it was a temporary solution. For 2 years, I shook my head. Don't lie at least now, son. Not in front of all these people? Imogene, seeing the situation spinning out of control, tried to save the day. Ladies and gentlemen, she addressed the guests with a strained smile, there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should... Misunderstanding? I interrupted her. Forging a death certificate is a felony, Imogen, and I know you used your connections at the insurance company to arrange it. The woman in the corner of the room, I recognized her as Lauren Phelps, Imogen's former colleague, turned pale and hurried toward the exit. Not so fast, Lauren, I called out to her. You think I don't know about your role in this scam? Forged medical records, a fake death certificate, you could get real time for that. Lauren froze at the door, her face a look of pure horror. The guests began to leave the party, mumbling apologies or just silently slipping out the door. No one wanted to witness a family drama that clearly went beyond a normal argument. Soon it was just me, Vernon, Imogene, and a couple of guests left in the penthouse, too shocked to move. Vernon, seeing that it was pointless to deny the obvious, changed tactics. Okay, Dad, his voice became softer, more conciliatory. Let's talk. Alone. I'll explain everything. We can work this out as a family. Family? I laughed bitterly. You gave up the right to be called family the moment you abandoned me in that house, when you declared me dead. It was Imogene's idea, Vernon suddenly blurted out, pointing at his wife. She suggested it. She organized the whole thing. Imogene gasped at the betrayal. Vernon, how could you? You were the one who said that your father wouldn't last long anyway, that it was only a matter of time. They began to accuse each other, oblivious to my presence, to the guests, to everything but the desire to shift blame. I watched this spectacle with grim satisfaction. Their alliance, built on lies and betrayal, was crumbling before my eyes. Enough, I said at last. I don't care which of you came up with the plan. You were both in on it. You're both guilty. What are you going to do? Vernon asked, his voice trembling with fear. I've already done everything, I answered calmly. Look around you, son. Your guests have scattered. Your friends have learned the truth about you. Tomorrow, all of Malden will be talking about how Vernon Chambers declared his father dead for money. Your reputation, your standing in the community, all ruined. Imogene burst into tears, collapsing onto the couch. Vernon stood pale as a sheet, his hands trembling. And that's not all, I continued. I met with a lawyer. We're going to sue. There will be an investigation, a public trial. Every sordid detail of your plan will be made public. You can't do that, Vernon whispered. You're my father. I stopped being your father the day you declared me dead, I replied. Aha, now I'm just a man demanding justice. I turned to leave, feeling strangely empty. Revenge didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected, only bitterness and fatigue. Wait! Vernon came after me. Please, let's talk. There must be another way. We can work this out peacefully. I'll give you back the penthouse, the money, everything. I stopped in the doorway and looked at my son, this stranger who would do anything to save his own skin. It's too late, Vernon. It's too late. With those words, I walked out of the penthouse, leaving behind a ruined party, ruined reputations, and ruined relationships. My revenge plan had worked even better than I'd expected, but there was no joy, only a sense of duty done. In the hallway, I met a few guests who hadn't yet left. They looked at me with distrust and fear, as if I were a ghost, which in fact I was. a ghost of the past who had come back to remind me of my sins. Is it true? A middle-aged woman I vaguely remembered as Imogen's friend asked me, did they really pronounce you dead to take your property? Every word of it, I replied. And now they will get what they deserve. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the first floor button. Looking at my reflection in the mirrored wall, I didn't see a ghost, but just a tired old man who lived too long for revenge. Downstairs, Oliver and Jason were waiting for me. I could tell by the look on their faces that they already knew what had happened. News in these situations spread instantly. How was the resurrection? Knocking, Oliver asked with a smirk. Exactly as we planned, I answered as I got into the car. They're exposed, reputations ruined. Now all that's left is the legal part. You don't look too happy for someone who's just gotten revenge on traitors, Jason said. I shrugged. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I'd expected. We pulled away from the river bay just as a police car was pulling up to the building. Apparently, one of the guests had decided that the situation called for an intervention from the authorities. What now? Oliver asked. Now, I took a deep breath. I'm going to get my life back. Every part of it. News of my resurrection traveled through Malden in a matter of hours. By the next morning, it seemed like the whole town was talking about it. I woke up in Oliver's apartment to a phone call. It was Dwight Frank, the lawyer we'd visited earlier. Mr. Chambers, his voice sounded agitated. I just heard about yesterday's incident. We need to meet urgently. The situation had changed dramatically. An hour later, I was already sitting in his office. Dwight looked focused and businesslike with a stack of papers in front of him. What you did yesterday, he began, has changed the balance of power. Vernon and Imogen will not be able to deny the fraud after this public exposure. But now they will act desperately. We must get ahead of them. He was right. Vernon and Imogen are not going down without a fight. They have too much at stake, not just property and money, but their freedom if it comes to criminal prosecution. What do you suggest, I asked. Act quickly and decisively, Dwight answered. I've already prepared statements to the police, the prosecutor's office, and the court. We're charging them with fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of property. Add to that the possibility of kidnapping. Given the circumstances of your move to that house, no kidnapping, I interrupted him. I agreed to go, even though I'd been deceived. Dwight nodded. As you wish, but the other charges still stand. We need proof, Mr. Chambers. Everything you have. I pulled out of my bag the folder of documents Oliver, Jason, and I had been collecting for the past few weeks. Copies of my death certificate, newspaper clippings with the obituary, pictures of the house in the woods where I'd been sent, notes from witnesses. That's enough to get us started, Dwight said, looking through the materials. But we need more, especially the testimony of the people involved in the forgery. Lauren Phelps. I remembered the pale face of Imogen's former co-worker rushing toward the exit at last night's party. She was there yesterday, and I know she was in on the scam. Great, Dwight made a note. I'll try to contact her. Maybe she'll agree to cooperate in exchange for leniency. We spent almost 3 hours in Dwight's office strategizing. When I left, I felt more confident. For the first time in 2 years, I had a real plan to get my life back. Not just revenge, but justice. When I got back to Oliver, I found him watching the local news. A familiar face flashed across the screen. Vernon was being interviewed by a reporter. My father suffers from dementia, he said with a look of genuine concern on his face. We didn't know he was alive all this time. We were told he died in the hospital of a heart attack. We were as shocked to see him as anyone. Now we just want to help him get the medical attention he needs. What a creep, Oliver muttered, turning off the TV. Now he's trying to make you look crazy. I wasn't surprised. It was predictable, the only defense they had left. If they can convince people that I'm suffering from age-related dementia, they can explain my accusations with the delusions of a sick old man. We need to disprove it, I said. And fast. I'm on it. Oliver pointed to his phone. Jason's contacting the reporters. We're having our own press conference this afternoon. Plus, Dr. Ramirez has agreed to examine you and give an opinion on your mental state. Dr. Pablo Ramirez was the neurologist who treated me after I was electrocuted years ago. He knew me well enough to testify to my sanity. The press conference was organized in the conference room of a small hotel. A surprisingly large number of reporters showed up. The story of the resurrected old man accusing his son of fraud was too juicy to miss. I sat at the table with Dwight, Oliver, Jason, and Dr. Ramirez, a sea of microphones and cameras in front of us. "Thank you all for coming," Dwight began. "We're here to clear the air about Mr. Hubert Chambers, who, as you know, was wrongly declared dead 2 years ago." I watched the faces of the journalists: skepticism, curiosity, hunger for sensation. I had to convince them I was right. "I'd like to give the floor first to Dr. Ramirez, who conducted the medical examination of Mr. Chambers this morning," Dwight continued. Dr. Ramirez, an older man with impressive gray hair and kind eyes, leaned into the microphone. "I've known Hubert Chambers for over 20 years, he said. "I've had a full neurological examination today, and I can say with certainty that Mr. Chambers does not suffer from dementia or any other cognitive disorder. His memory, logic, and ability to analyze are all at a level appropriate for his age, and in some aspects even above normal." After the doctor, I took the floor. I told my story from beginning to end. The illness, the trip to the country house, how I discovered my death certificate, the 2 years in exile, and my return. "I have proof," I said, pointing to a folder of documents. "Infan, a copy of my death certificate, obviously forged. Photographs of the house where I spent 2 years. Testimonies from people who saw me there. And most importantly, myself, alive and well, standing before you." The journalists asked questions one after another. Why didn't I go to the police right away? How did I survive in that house? Do I have proof that it was my son who organized the forgery of documents? I answered calmly and clearly, not letting my emotions take over. My friend sat beside me, supporting me with every nod, every glance. "Mr. Chambers," a young journalist addressed me, "your son claims that you yourself disappeared 2 years ago, and they've been looking for you. What do you say to that? Ask him why, in that case, they didn't report my disappearance to the police." I answered. "Swearingen, why did they organize a funeral instead? Why did they sell my belongings and occupy my house?" This answer elicited a wave of approving nods among the journalists. Even the most skeptical of them were beginning to believe my version. After the press conference, Dwight and I went to the police station to file a formal report. Detective Morrison, an older policeman with tired eyes, listened carefully to our story. "It's a serious case," he said, looking over the paperwork. "Fraud, forgery of documents. I'll schedule an investigation, but I must warn you, it will take time." "We have time," I said. "The main thing is that justice is served." As I left the station, I felt strangely relieved. The process had been set in motion. The official bodies were involved. Now I didn't have to act alone. In the evening, we gathered at Oliver's to discuss the next steps. A few more of my old friends and acquaintances joined us, having heard of my return and offered to help. "They're not going down without a fight," Jason said, "especially Imogene. She had too much invested in her new status to just give it up." He was right. While we were talking, Oliver's cell phone rang. It was Martha, his neighbor who worked at the local paper. "Did you see the evening edition?" she asked excitedly. "Imogene did an interview. She says you've always treated her badly, that this is some kind of revenge on you, that you have a history of mental problems." We quickly turned on the TV and switched to a local channel. Imogene was sitting in the studio, elegant and demure, with an expression of grief on her face. "I've always respected Hubert and tried to build a good relationship with him," she said. "But he never accepted me. He was always cold. When we got the news of his death, we were devastated. It took Vernon weeks to recover. And now these accusations. We just want to help him, get him the medical attention he needs." "What an actress," Oliver grumbled. "Best Drama Actress Oscar." I stared at the screen in silence. Imogene looked genuinely concerned, her eyes glistening with held-back tears. Anyone who didn't know the truth would have believed her. "Hubert has had a hard life," she continued. "Early loss of his wife, stress at work. Vernon and I noticed signs of dementia even before he disappeared. Forgetfulness, confusion about time, sometimes aggression." "She's trying to make you look crazy," Jason said. "It's classic." "We need witnesses," I replied. "People who saw me in the last few years before the death and can confirm that I was sane." "I have an idea," Oliver said. "Do you remember Sarah Dawson? She worked at the hospital when you were lying there with a heart attack. She can confirm your condition just before you disappeared. Sarah Dawson was the nurse who took care of me after my heart attack. She was always attentive and kind. If anyone could confirm my sanity at that time, it was her. The next day we found Sarah. She worked at the same hospital, but now in a different department. When she saw me, she couldn't contain her surprise. "Mr. Chambers." Her eyes widened. "But how? We were told you were dead." "It's a long story, Sarah," I replied, "and I need your help to tell it right." Sarah proved to be an invaluable witness. She not only confirmed that I was fully conscious and adequate after the heart attack, but also told me about Vernon and Imogen's suspicious behavior. "They kept asking about your condition, but in a strange way," she recalled. "Not like concerned relatives, but more like, I don't know how to explain it, like they were waiting for bad news. And when you were discharged, Imogen asked how much longer you would live with your diagnosis. That struck me as very unusual. Sarah's testimony made our case even stronger. But we needed more. The next target was Lauren Phelps, a former colleague of Imogen's who was involved in document fraud. Finding her wasn't easy. After the party incident, she seemed to vanish. "She quit her job at the insurance company the day after the party," Dwight said, "and moved out of her apartment, probably left town. That was a bad sign." Without Lauren's testimony, we'd have a harder time proving a direct link between Imogen and the forgery. But we had the good fortune of Rachel Pierce, another former colleague of Imogen's. Rachel contacted us herself after hearing about the case on the news. "I always knew there was something wrong with this story," she said, sitting in Dwight's office. "Imogen suddenly had access to a lot of money. A new house, trips, expensive clothes, all right after her father-in-law died. And then I overheard her talking to Lauren. They were discussing some documents that needed to be buried deep." Rachel agreed to testify. It wasn't a direct witness to the document forgery, but her testimony added weight to our case. While we were gathering evidence, Vernon and Imogen weren't sitting idly by either. They hired a high-profile attorney specializing in complex family cases, and they continued their campaign to discredit me. There were witnesses on social media who allegedly saw me in a strange, deranged state before I disappeared. A local newspaper published an article where an anonymous source spoke about my strange behavior and outbursts of aggression. "They're trying to create the image of an unstable old man," Dwight said, "so they can claim that you left home because you were paranoid and they've been looking for you all this time." "But that's a lie," I said indignantly. "They don't have any proof." "In the court of public opinion, evidence isn't always necessary," he replied. "It's enough to sow doubt." It was a dirty game, but I was willing to play it. Years of working as an electrician had taught me not to be afraid of dirt. We decided to be proactive. Dwight organized another press conference, this time with witnesses. Sarah Dawson, Rachel Pierce, Dr. Ramirez, several of my former colleagues and neighbors all made statements attesting to my sanity and integrity. "I've known Hubert Chambers for 30 years, said William Drake, my former supervisor at the power plant. "He's one of the most responsible and reliable men I've ever met. He's worked with dangerous high-voltage systems where the slightest mistake could cost lives. You don't trust unstable people to do this kind of work." After the press conference, the scales of public opinion began to tip in my favor. People saw not a crazy old man, but a victim of family betrayal. But the decisive moment came unexpectedly. Dwight got a call from Lauren Phelps herself. "I'm ready to talk," she said, "but I need assurances." The meeting took place in the district attorney's office. Lauren looked exhausted and frightened, but determined. "I can't live with this anymore," she said. "Imogen made me forge the insurance papers. Said it was just a formality, that you were really dead but needed to speed up the probate process. I didn't know you were alive. I swear I never would have agreed if I'd known the truth." She provided copies of the emails she'd exchanged with Imogen, drafts of the forged documents, even a recording of a phone call where Imogen discussed the details of the plan. "This is a breakthrough," Dwight said after the meeting. "With this evidence, we have everything we need for a successful case." Vernon and Imogen were at an impasse. Their campaign to discredit them had failed. Their accomplice had defected to our side. The evidence of their fraud was irrefutable. In a last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, they offered a settlement through their attorney. Return the penthouse and half the money they spent in exchange for not prosecuting the case. What do you think? Dwight asked. It's a reasonable offer. You'll get your property without a lengthy lawsuit. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just end it all, go back to my house and start my life over. But the other part demanded full justice. No, I finally answered. No agreements. They would have to answer for their actions under the law. Dwight nodded understandingly. Then we're going all the way. The trial was scheduled for the following month. During that time, the story gained national publicity. Several major TV stations reported on the Chambers case. Journalists besieged Oliver's house trying to get an exclusive interview with me. Vernon and Imogene were completely isolated. Their friends turned their backs on them. Colleagues shunned them. Neighbors faltered when they met. The empire of lies they had built was crumbling before their eyes. A week before the trial, I got a call from Vernon. His voice sounded broken and tired. "Dad," he said, "can we talk? Just you and me. No lawyers." I agreed to meet at a cafe downtown, a public place where we'd both feel comfortable. Vernon showed up alone. He'd lost weight, dark circles under his eyes, his expensive suit looked wrinkled. "Thanks for seeing me," he said, sitting down across from me. "Go ahead," I said dryly. "I'm listening." Vernon took a deep breath. "I'm not going to make excuses or apologize. I know it's pointless. I just want you to know that the idea was mine, not Imogene's. I came up with the whole thing myself. I forged the paperwork myself. I'm the one who decided to send you to that house." "Ano, why?" was all I could ask. "Money," he answered simply. "It's always about money, isn't it? Imogene and I were in debt. Loans, mortgages, bad investments. When you ended up in the hospital with a heart attack, I saw a way out. Quick and easy." "You could have asked for help," I said. "I would have helped you." "I know," he lowered his eyes. "But I needed everything. Your penthouse, your savings. Not a portion, not a loan. Everything. I looked at my son and I saw a stranger. Something was broken in him, something important that makes us human." "What do you want out of this meeting, Vernon?" I asked tiredly. "I want to tell you that I admit my guilt. Completely. That's what I'll say in court. Imogene didn't know the whole truth. I lied to her as I lied to everyone. It was unexpected. Vernon was defending his wife, taking the blame. Maybe there was something human left in him." "Is that it?" I asked. "No." He looked up. "I want you to know that I realize that I have lost the right to be called your son. I'm not apologizing. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, but for doing this to you." With those words, he got up and walked away, leaving me in a state of confusion. The next day, Dwight reported that Vernon had officially pleaded guilty to the prosecutor's office and dropped all charges against me. Imogene had also admitted complicity, albeit to a lesser degree. "They're plea bargaining," Dwight explained. "Vernon will get jail time, but less than he would have gotten. Imogene would probably get a suspended sentence. Your penthouse and the rest of the money will be returned to you in full." It was a victory, a complete and total victory. Justice had been served. I should have felt satisfaction, joy, relief. But looking out the window at the streets of Malden, I felt only fatigue and emptiness. Revenge had been accomplished, but the price had been high. I had lost my son. Not the day he declared me dead, but much earlier, when something in his soul had died and given way to greed and selfishness. "Are you okay?" Oliver asked, noticing my mood. "I will be," I answered, "when this is over, when I got home." The day of the trial was surprisingly sunny. Clear skies, a light breeze. Nature seemed to be celebrating justice with me. I wore my best suit, the same one I'd once worn, to walk Vernon down the aisle. Strange irony. The Malden courthouse was packed. Journalists, gawkers, the curious, everyone wanted to see the end of a story that had become a major sensation in recent weeks, not only in our town, but far beyond. I walked down the steps, surrounded by the support of my friends. Oliver and Jason were there for me, as always. They were joined by others, former colleagues, neighbors, even the concierge from River Bay, who always greeted me in the morning. In the courtroom, I saw Vernon and Imogene for the first time since we met in the cafe. They were sitting side by side, but there felt a distance between them that was more than physical. Vernon looked resigned, Imogene looked scared and confused. The meeting didn't last long. As promised, Vernon fully pleaded guilty, taking primary responsibility for the crime. Imogene admitted complicity. The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, listened carefully to all the testimony. The court finds Vernon Chambers guilty of fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of property, she announced. Given his candid confession and cooperation with the investigation, I sentence him to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 1 year. Imogene received 2 years probation and community service. Both had to make full restitution for all the money they embezzled. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court finds that all of Hubert Chambers' death papers are null and void. All rights to the property, including the River Bay penthouse and all bank accounts, are returned to their rightful owner. The gavel bang put an end to the story. I won. Justice had been served. My life was officially returned to me. After the hearing, Vernon approached me in the hallway of the courthouse. A police officer accompanied him. My son was now a prisoner awaiting transfer to jail. Congratulations, he said quietly. You've won. It wasn't a contest, Vernon, I replied. I just wanted justice. He nodded. I know, and I got it. Goodbye, Father. Yeah. Goodbye, son. The words were hard for me to say. As he was led away, I felt a strange emptiness inside. There was no triumph, no joy of victory, only a quiet sadness for what might have been, but never will be. Imogene had escaped prison, but her punishment was different. Disgrace, rejection, a ruined reputation. After the trial, she disappeared from sight, left Molden, it was said, for relatives in another state. Our last conversation with her was brief. I didn't know the whole truth, she said, avoiding looking me in the eye. Vernon assured me that you really did die in the hospital. You could have checked, I replied. You could have asked the doctors, the nurses. I didn't want to know. She finally looked at me. It was easier that way. That was what Imogen was all about, the path of least resistance, even if it led through lies and betrayal. A week after the trial, I returned to my penthouse. A strange feeling swept over me as I stepped over the threshold of a house I hadn't been in 2 years. Everything was different, new furniture, new wallpaper, even the smell was different. Vernon and Imogene had erased all traces of my presence, creating a space of their own. I stood in the middle of the living room, not knowing where to put my hands. This was my home, and yet it was someone else's place at the same time. I'd have to start from scratch, reclaiming not only legal, but emotional ownership. How does it feel to be back home? Oliver asked, helping me with my things. Weird, I answered honestly. Like I was in a museum of someone else's life. You'll get used to it eventually, he patted my shoulder. You'll replace the furniture, repaint the walls. Soon it'll be like it used to be. But I knew it would never be the same. Too much had changed. I had changed. The financial situation wasn't fully restored. Vernon and Imogene had spent almost half of my savings. The court ordered them to pay restitution, but that would take years. But what I had left was enough. I've always lived modestly. In the first few days after my return, I spent time organizing the house. I threw out most of the furniture they'd bought and ordered new ones. Or rather, old furniture, similar to what I had before. I repainted the walls in the usual calm colors. I arranged the few surviving photos and memorabilia I'd managed to get back through thrift stores. Little by little, the penthouse was becoming my home again. But something was still missing. Perhaps the sense of security that had come before. Or maybe the sense of purpose in those spacious rooms for a lonely old man. A month after I returned, the news came. Imogene had sold all her possessions, expensive jewelry, designer clothes, a car, and moved into the very house in the woods where I'd spent 2 years in exile. She planned to live there until Vernon got out of prison. It's ironic. The house that had been my prison became their only refuge. All they could afford after paying restitution and legal fees. I didn't feel any gloating when I heard that. Only a strange sense of completing the circle. Justice sometimes takes bizarre forms. Are you going to visit them there? Jason asked as we discussed the news over dinner. No, I shook my head. This phase of my life is over. It was time to move on. But moving on wasn't that easy. After everything that had happened, I felt lost. Revenge had been exacted, justice had been served. And now what? What to fill the remaining years of my life with. I started small. I reconnected with old friends, renewed my membership in the chess club, and started seeing friends regularly. Oliver and Jason were still around, supporting me in difficult moments. One day, as I was sorting through the boxes of things I'd returned from a rummage sale, I came across an old photo album. There were snapshots of Vernon as a child, a smiling boy on a bike, a teenager with a fishing rod, a college graduate in a robe. In all the photos, I saw a happy, hopeful man. What happened to that boy? At what point had his heart hardened enough to betray his own father? Was it my fault? Had I spent too much time working and too little time raising my son? These questions plagued me through sleepless nights. I replayed every significant moment of his growing up, trying to find the breaking point, the moment when everything went wrong. Was it the divorce of his first marriage, after which Vernon had become more cynical? Or a failed investment, a job loss, a midlife crisis? Or maybe I just didn't notice the signs that were always there, the selfishness, the tendency to blame others for his failures, the envy of more successful peers. I even wrote a letter to him in prison once. I sat for a long time over a blank sheet of paper, not knowing what to say. All I wrote was, I want to understand where I went wrong as a father. He sent it and waited for a reply. The reply came 2 weeks later, a short note written in familiar handwriting. You weren't wrong. It was always about me, not you. Those words brought some relief, but didn't answer all the questions. Perhaps some things just can't be explained or fully understood. Slowly, life was falling into a new direction. I started helping Jason at his electrical installation firm, not full-time, of course, but as a consultant. The work provided not only additional income, but also a sense of usefulness, a structure to days that would otherwise drag on indefinitely. 6 months after the trial, I was approached by a writer who wanted to write a book about my story. I agreed on one condition. Part of the royalties would go to help elderly people who had been victims of domestic violence or fraud. This is how the Second Life Foundation was born, a small organization that helps older people recover their rights and start over after difficult situations. The foundation became my new vocation. I met people going through similar situations, shared my experiences, and gave advice. My story, while painful, served as an inspiration for others, proof that it is never too late to fight for justice. In this work, I found a new meaning of life, not in revenge, not in bitter memories, but in helping others. Vernon served his time quietly and roughly. According to the warden I sometimes talked to, he read a lot, participated in the prison's educational program, even helped other inmates with their paperwork. Perhaps prison was giving him what I could not, an understanding of the consequences of his actions. Imogene did live in the woods. The locals told me that she had changed completely. She had become quiet, modest, even started growing vegetables in the small vegetable garden behind the house. A life of isolation and poverty had changed her more than any imprisonment could. One day I received a strange package from her, a box of old photographs and things she had saved from the sale of my possessions. Among them was an old silver cigarette case that had belonged to my father, and Elizabeth's wedding ring, which I thought was lost forever. Attached to the parcel was a short note. This belongs to you. I regret my part in all that has happened. Perhaps even a heart like Imogene's is capable of remorse when faced with the consequences of her actions. I never responded to that premise. Not out of anger or resentment. I just didn't see the point. Some doors are better left closed. My life went on. In the penthouse that was finally home again, I welcomed sunsets over the river, just as I had once planned. Hosted friends, listened to old records, read books put aside for later years ago. Sometimes I thought of the house in the woods where I spent 2 years in exile. Strangely, as time went on, those memories ceased to be only painful. I remembered the silence of the forest in the mornings, the family of foxes that lived near the house, the starry sky that you don't see in the city. I learned more about myself in those 2 years than I had learned in the previous 73. I learned that I could survive in the most difficult conditions, that even at 75, it's not too late to start over. That revenge can be an empowering goal, but it doesn't bring happiness. A year after the trial, when the dust had finally settled and my story was no longer the main topic of conversation in the city, I decided to do something I had long thought about, sell the penthouse and buy a small house on the outskirts of town. Not in the middle of nowhere, of course, but not in the middle of nowhere either. A place to grow old in peace, surrounded by nature and a few loyal friends. Oliver helped with the search. We found the perfect option, a small but cozy house with a garden, not far from the lake, a place where you can welcome dawns with a cup of coffee on the veranda and see off sunsets watching the water surface. Are you sure you want to sell the penthouse? Oliver asked. After everything you went through to get it back? It wasn't about the penthouse, I answered. It was about principle. It was about justice. Now that justice had been served, I could live where I really wanted to live. The sale of the penthouse brought in a good amount of money, most of which I donated to the Second Life Foundation. The rest was enough for a new home and a trouble-free existence in the remaining years. The move was a symbolic step, the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. I did not forget or forgive the betrayal, but I stopped letting it define my life. I found a peace in my new home that I didn't have in the penthouse with its bitter memories. I got a dog from the shelter, an old golden retriever as lonely as I was. Named him Charlie after a childhood friend. Vernon got out of prison a year and 2 months later on parole for good behavior. He never tried to contact me, and I was grateful for that. Some relationships can't be repaired, no matter how much one wishes they could. He was rumored to have gone back to Imogene, and they were trying to start a new life together away from Molden. He was said to have taken a job as an accountant for a small firm, while she worked at the local library. A modest life, no luxuries or pretensions. Sometimes I wondered if they were happy. Did what happened teach them anything important? Or were they just hiding, waiting for a new chance at easy money and a beautiful life? But these thoughts visited me less and less often. My life was filled with other concerns. A foundation, friends, new interests. At the age of 78, I began to learn to play the piano, a childhood dream I had never gotten around to. Justice was done, revenge was served, but real healing came only when I let go of the past and focused on the present. On quiet evenings, sitting on the veranda with Charlie at my feet, I sometimes pored over old photographs. Elizabeth with baby Vernon in her arms, our first family vacation, my son's high school graduation, moments that no one could take away from me, even if the relationship itself was irrevocably broken. In such moments, I thought about the strange twists of fate, about how easily a person can lose everything and how hard it is to start over, about how even in the darkest situation, you can find light if you don't give up. My story, the story of Hubert Chambers, an electrician, a father, a man declared dead and resurrected, has become more than just a personal drama. It became a symbol for many older people facing the betrayal of loved ones. Perhaps that was the point of everything that happened. Not in revenge, not in punishing the betrayers, but that my experience would help others to keep their hands up, to fight for justice, to start anew, no matter how old they are. I don't know how many more years fate has given me. At my age, every day is a gift. But I know one thing. I will live these days in my own way, on my own terms, as a man who overcame not only the betrayal of my loved ones, but also my own despair. And this is perhaps the most important victory of all.